Alexander Dugin is a Russian intellectual who focuses on politics and philosophy. It is said that he has the ear of Vladimir Putin. Now, how true this is, or just how much influence he has with Putin, is unknown. Dugin has set up his own political platform entitled The Fourth Political Theory. Democracy, communism, and fascism being the first three. Now, even though Dugin has gone through the pains of trying to separate his fourth political position from the third political position, fascism, his political theory, in my opinion, is in part fascistic in nature itself. And since fascism has been reduced to a pejorative in modern society, it is no wonder why people try to avoid the label. And even though Dugin goes through the pains of trying to separate his ideology from the term fascist, he is still called a fascist. Just a quick look on his Wikipedia bio, Dugin is a Russian political scientist whose views have been described as fascist. Now, like I said, he doesn't call himself a fascist and probably doesn't like the fact that Wikipedia describes him as a fascist in the very first sentence. So what is his fourth political theory? Well, it is not a well-defined political platform with a bunch of rules and laws. Not yet, at least. What it is, and how Dugin presents it, is a philosophical launching board for a new political ideology. So we will go through a few of its major tenets, but much more can be found in Alexander Dugin's book entitled The Fourth Political Theory. First, let's look at how Dugin defines and explains the first three political theories. First, liberalism, left and right. Second, communism, including both Marxism and socialism along with social democracy. And third, fascism, including National Socialism and other varieties of the Third Way, like Franco's National Syndicalism, Perón's Justicialism, or even like the Salazar regime. Now he states of these three political theories, the beginning of the 21st century coincides with the end of ideology. That is, all three of them. Each met a different end. The third political theory was destroyed in its youth. The second died of decrepit old age, and the first was reborn as something else, as post-liberalism and the global market society. Now on to the fourth political theory. Dugin incorporates some of philosopher Martin Heidegger's concepts into his political theory. We can identify the most profound ontological foundation of the fourth political theory. Here, we should pay attention not only to the theologies and mythologies, but also to the reflective philosophical experience of one particular thinker, who had made a unique attempt of constructing a fundamental ontology, the most all-encompassing, paradoxical, profound, and penetrating study of being. I'm talking about Martin Heidegger. A brief description of Heidegger's concept is as follows. At the dawn of philosophical thought, people raised the question of being as the focal point of their thinking. But by making it their primary subject, they risked getting confused by all the nuances and the complicated relationship between being and thought, between pure being and its expression in existence, a being in itself. This failure had already occurred in the teaching of Heraclitus about the physis and the logos. Next, it is obvious that in Parmenides' work, and finally in Plato's, who placed ideas between man and existence, and who defined truth as that which corresponds to them, the referential theory of knowledge reached its culmination in failure. This gave birth to alienation, eventually leading to calculated thinking, and then to development of technology. Little by little, man lost sight of pure being and pursued the path of nihilism. The essence of technology expresses this ever-increasing nihilism. In the new era, this tendency reaches its pinnacle. Technical development, ultimately displaces being and crowns nothingness. Heidegger bitterly hated liberalism, considered it an expression of the source of calculative thinking, which lies at the heart of Western nihilism. Yet his philosophy was not hopelessly pessimistic. He believed that nothingness itself is the flip side of being, which, in such a paradoxical way, reminds mankind of existence. If we correctly decipher the logic behind the unfurling of being, then thinking mankind can save itself with lightning speed at the very moment of its greatest risk. Thus, at the heart of the fourth political theory lies the trajectory of approaching the event, which will embody the triumphant return of being, and that exact moment when mankind forgets about it once and for all, to the point that the last traces of it disappear. So basically, Dugin feels when we reach the actual precipice of nihilism, consumerism, and globalism, there will come this, quote unquote, event that Heidegger spoke of that will thrust Russia away from the globalist agenda and into something like his fourth political theory, because the whole premise of this concept from Heidegger is basically it's like the old saying, it's always darkest before dawn. And so this is his belief that this event, this catalyst, will essentially just wake people up. And I got to say, not putting it in terms of Heidegger or anything like that, of his beliefs of the event, that is something I've felt that's coming around too, that people will just naturally grow sick of this nihilism, this consumerism, and this globalism, this degrading humanity into just stock shares and consumers. That this even though we get all our instant gratifications, it's like that's not enough to consume, to enthrall, to occupy the human consciousness. That we can distract ourselves for quite a period of time on it, for sure, and we can get into the hedonism and the gluttony of it, but there's still, I believe, with no, there's nothing rational to support this belief, but I believe that there is a breaking point as well, that people will eventually start getting sick of this, and that this will all manifest on a subconscious level, and then it will slowly make its way to a conscious level, then into reality as some form of anti-capitalist, anti-democracy, anti-materialist, political revolution or revolt comes about. So basically, he's saying essentially the same thing, that even in its darkest hour, mankind still has hope, and that's just this belief in this. Once again, as Heidegger described, this event. Now let's get into some of the tenets of the fourth political theory. Now, once again, there is no, at least in the book, there is no specific doctrines laid down. There are just basic philosophical tenets and basic views on important dividing factors like race and religion. So, speaking of race, let's get on to the subject of race. As one of its essential features, the fourth political theory rejects all forms and varieties of racism and all forms of normative hierarchization of societies based on ethnic, religious, social, technological, economic, or cultural grounds. Societies can be compared, but we cannot state that any one of them is objectively better than the others. Such an assessment is always subjective, and any attempt to raise a subjective assessment to the status of a theory is racism. So he's basically saying, yeah, we're different. We're not believing or we're not promoting this myth of equalization of everyone, but we don't look at the differences as we're superior, you're inferior, or they're superior, we're inferior. It's we're simply different. Now, he describes quote unquote racism under two major classifications. First, obviously, the biological type of racism, like that expressed in Nazi Germany. And secondly, the modern globalization effort by the liberals. He deems this as racist. He states, undoubtedly, racist is the idea of unipolar globalism. It is based on the idea that the history and the values of Western and especially American society are equivalent to universal law, and artificially tries to construct a global society based on what are actually local and historical specific values: democracy, the market, parliamentarianism, capitalism, individualism, human rights, and unlimited technological development. These values are local ones, emerging from the particular development of a single culture. And globalization is trying to impose them onto all of humanity as something that is universal. Globalization is thus nothing more than a global, deployed model of Western European, or rather Anglo-Saxon ethnocentrism, which is the purest manifestation of racist ideology. So yeah, he's talking like the American exceptionalism. America has to go around and show all the savages of the world, the beauty of, the free market and democracy and capitalism, etc., etc. And, they have to go save everyone. And it is this elitist point of view that Dugin describes as being quote unquote racist. So, much like the fascists, Dugin is opposed to globalism and is in favor of nationalism. Or, as he says it, instead of a unipolar world, the fourth political theory insists upon a multipolar world. Belief in the multipolar world is a belief that different civilizations, cultures, ethnicities are more advantageous to the human condition than a world forced under one culture and subdued under one world government. True diversity in the world, as nature is diverse, so should people be, and we should have diverse cultures, diverse ethnicities, diverse races, diverse religions, etc. All of these are organic expressions of our earliest selves, and to try and whitewash these things under the banner of the almighty green dollar is nothing short of genocide of culture, ethnicity, nationality. Now, even though Dugin is against these forms of quote-unquote racism, he is far from egalitarian. Dugin believes in what we today call race realism. He believes in the differences of races, ethnicities, cultures. He believes in their differences. But he does not say one is better than the other or try to pat themselves on the back as being superior over anyone else. Just simply being different. And if these people are living on the same landmass or nation, they can remain different while having these common goals for their nation's sustainability and progress. Now, his take on, or the fourth political theory's take on individualism. It is now obvious that the weakest and the strongest aspect of the first political theory comes from its direct appeal to the individualism, pleading that he remain himself by himself in his own autonomous individuality, uniqueness, peculiarity, and partiality. We propose the theory that every human identity is acceptable and justified, except for that of the individual. Man is anything but an individual. We must look carefully at a liberal when he reads or hears an axiom of this kind. I think this will be an impressive spectacle. All his tolerance will instantly evaporate. Human rights will be distributed to anyone, just not the one who dares to utter something along those lines. Now, of course, Dugin is highlighting the hypocrisy of the liberals. They are tolerant just as long as they are not offended. In fact, these liberal hypocrites who go on and on about love, empathy, equality, and things of that nature are a lot of the time the most aggressive, violent, and hostile people out there, as we have seen over and over again in our modern day. It reminds me of a few lines from a poem from Charles Bukowski. In the poem, The Genius of the Crowd, Bukowski states, "And the best at murder are those that preach against it. And the best at hate are those who preach love. And the best at war, finally, are those who preach peace." Now, this is the modern day liberal and SJW in spades. Anytime there is any kind of opposing view around them, they go completely apeshit, hostile, violent, in your face, hatred spewing from them. They definitely do not like their hypocrisies pointed out, or they definitely do not like their ideology challenged at all. Dugin goes on about the toxic ideal of individuality. Liberalism must be defeated and destroyed, and the individual must be thrown off his pedestal. But according to Dugin, there is something of value in the liberal ideology, and that is the concept of freedom. Even though Dugin feels the liberal to have a skewed concept of freedom, Dugin explains, we must say yes to freedom in all its meanings and in all its perspectives. The fourth political theory should be a theory of absolute freedom. Freedom can be of any kind, free of correlation or lack thereof, facing any direction, any goal. Freedom is the greatest value of the fourth political theory, since it coincides with the center and its dynamic, energetic core. The difference is that this freedom is conceived as human freedom, not as freedom for the individual. As the freedom given by ethnocentrism, the freedom of the culture and the freedom of society, and the freedom for any form of subjectivity except for that of an individual. Man, as an individual, is a prison without walls. That is to say, the freedom of an individual is a prison. In order to obtain true freedom, we must go beyond the limits of the individual. In this sense, the fourth political theory is the theory of liberation, of going beyond the prison walls into the outside world, which begins where the jurisdiction of individual identity ends, against the monotonic process. The monotonic process is what Dugin describes as the idea of constant growth, constant accumulation, development, steady progress, all accompanied by the increase of only one specific indicator. In mathematics, this is associated with the ideas of the monotonic value. In other words, the ever-increasing value, hence monotonic functions. Monotonic processes are the type that always proceeds in only one direction. For example, all their indicators constantly increase without cyclical fluctuations and oscillations. In regards to time and history and how Dugin views things, he views history as more cyclical, that history has been based off transitions from civilization high to civilization lows, repeating throughout eternity like a wheel in motion, where the monotonic view is history and time are always ascending, always improving, always getting better. This is our standard view of evolution. Mankind is simply just always improving, and like it, our surroundings are, time is, etc., etc. This is something Dugin definitely rejects. He's definitely has a belief in the Hindu cycle of life, or like the early belief of the different ages. In terms of its methodological base, the fourth political theory must be rooted in this fundamental rejection of the monotonic process. That is to say, the fourth political theory must assert that the monotonic process is unscientific, inadequate, immoral, and untrue, as its future axiom, and everything that appeals to the monotonic process and its variations, such as development, evolution, modernization, should at the very least be understood in terms of a cyclical mode. Instead of ideas of the monotonic process, progress, and modernization, we must endorse other slogans directed towards life. Repetition, the preservation of that which is of value, and changing that which should be changed. Instead of always looking for modernization and growth, we should instead orient ourselves in the direction of balance, adaptability, and harmony. Instead of desiring to move upward and forward, we must adapt to that which exists, to understand where we are, and to harmonize the socio-political processes. And most important, instead of growth, progress, and development, there is life. After all, There has been no proof offered yet to show that life is linked to growth. Dugin believes that the first three political theories are all monotonic in nature, and his fourth political theory thus separated from the first three political theories by its cyclical nature. He states some of the values here: social justice, national sovereignty, and traditional values are the three main principles of the fourth political theory. Religion. Dugin stresses the need for a return to more traditional methods of religion, but also doesn't advocate a purely theocratic state, but rather one that naturally embraces a theology but does not force its citizens to take part in ceremonies or be a believer. Believing that modernity and postmodernity have bastardized religion, Dugin states, eliminating the need to adjust theology to the rationalism of modernity, the adherents of the fourth political theory are free to ignore those theological and dogmatic elements in this monotheistic societies which were influenced by rationalism, especially in their later stages. Not only the highest supramental symbols of faith can be taken on board once again as a new shield, but so can those irrational aspects of cults, rites, and legends that have perplexed theologians in earlier ages. If we reject the idea of progress, that is, ancient gains value and credibility for us simply by virtue of the fact that it is ancient. Ancient means good, and the more ancient, the better. Of all creations, paradise is the most ancient one. The carriers of the fourth political theory must strive towards rediscovering it in the near future. As a traditionalist, Dugin is advocating returning the spirit and mysticism that were killed by rationalism and modernity back into religion. Because today, for the large part, these Western religions are hollowed out, and it's in namesake only that people identify themselves to these religions. So that sums up some of the major tenets of Dugin's political philosophical theory. A multipolar, not universal world that embraces a traditional approach to religion and spirituality and rejects postmodern materialism and cosmopolitanism. A philosophy based on cyclical time and not linear, and a heavy influence from the philosophical concepts of Martin Heidegger. These are the foundations, or like we said earlier, the philosophical launching boards of Dugin's fourth political theory, which he's trying to promote in Russia. And once again, it's said that he has Putin's ear, and how much he actually speaks to Putin or how much Putin actually listens to him, etc. Only he and Putin really knows. So it's speculation outside of that. But looking through his fourth political theories, there's definitely a lot of valid concepts. He's approaching things from different perspectives, which is always refreshing in this era where we are stuck in the dogmatism of the right-left paradigm. So if you want to get the political and philosophical wheels turning in your head, Alexander Dugin's fourth political theory is definitely a book to add to your list.